This is Generations. Folks, Kevin Swanson here with you, and can you believe it? Conservatives, now even Christians, advocating the federal face law at points for the disturbance caused in a worship service in downtown Minneapolis. What was it, last week? So please, 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 every Christian in America should know biblical law. If you stand on the authority of CNN for your political posturing, you're wrong. If you stand on the authority of Fox News and the neocons for your political positioning, you're wrong. If you stand on the authority of the anti-establishmentarianism, because anti-establishment is the right ethic, on the authority of whatever and whoever you are, you're wrong. If you stand on the authority of the ACLU, you're still wrong. If you stand on the authority of God's holy law, by his authority to establish the standards of justice, now you're on the right track. Biblical law requires eye for eye, tooth for tooth, life for life. It's the lex talionis. Check it out, Exodus 21. Every God-fearing, Bible-believing Christian in America should know the boundaries of God's justice. Now, listen up, everybody. We need to think rationally about this, which means think biblically. You don't put a pro-lifer in prison for 8 years because he stood in front of an abortion clinic and didn't hit anybody, didn't punch out an eye, anything like that. And somebody comes into my church and yells at me, biblical law does not allow for putting that guy in prison for 8 years. That's ridiculous. That's tyranny. That's injustice by the standards of God's holy law. By the way, they come into the church, they ruin the furniture, they break all the windows, which, by the way, has happened in this community. They pay for it, and they should pay $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. But we don't put them in jail for 8 years for that. Appealing to the federal face law as the standard for justice is just wrong, friends. You want to put a pro-lifer in prison for 8 years because they blocked an abortion clinic? Okay, the other side will call that trespassing. Trespassing laws usually will fine a guy to about $500 and maybe he gets in prison for a couple of days, a week or two. But don't allow the media to baffle you with these political jargon such that we have to back ourselves into supporting the face law. Liberals turn into tyrants with conservatives who block abortion clinics and try to stop people from killing babies using reasonably peaceful techniques. Conservatives turn into tyrants when their ox is gored and some miscreants start yelling at the pastor at a church service. Yeah, it's scary. It's not fun. It's against the law to trespass on somebody else's property, especially if they've asked you to leave. And yes, there probably should contribute $500 to the church. And if that's $500 per person and you've got a mob of 100 in the church, that's $50,000, not bad for a Sunday morning offering. But the federal face law, I don't think so. The face law is a violation of the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution to boot. And trespassing on private property is the jurisdiction of local and state governments. The face law was itself intended for abortion clinics from the beginning, and the 15 Rhino Republican senators that voted for it in 1994 will be remembered as tyrants for time immemorial. So what does Exodus 23 and verse 2 mean for us? Well, please don't get caught up with a mob scene or Fox News or CNN. You shall not run with the crowd to do evil, nor shall you bear witness in a lawsuit siding with the many so as to pervert justice. Exodus 23 and verse 2. So Christians, we have to be careful. Let's not be taken by a spirit of fear, of irrationality, of tyranny, of anger, of being caught up with a mob, whatever. We've been given the spirit of love, power, and a sound mind. But now, Christians must also be careful with this whole matter of protest. The left wants to accomplish change by protest, by anarchical revolutions, and not by electing godly, principled candidates who will govern by God's law. The media, by the way, is right behind the leftist protests. Why? Because the leftist media has been revolutionary, Marxist, and everything that's anti-biblical from the beginning. But that's not our modus operandi. We cannot change the world by revolution. We change the world by regeneration, reformation, from the bottom up. We simply cannot take the shortcuts. And we cannot change the world by breaking God's laws or by tyrannical means, by the face law, for example. We simply cannot and we must not take shortcuts. Now, final point. Whatever happened to liberty? Whatever happened to smaller government? Whatever happened to opposition to tyranny? The right wing seems to encourage this implicit trust in the police state that engages in torture and the violation of the Bill of Rights on the part of the government. The left wing, on the other hand, seems to encourage an implicit trust in government that provides social welfare and womb-to-tomb security, internationalism, and a police state if it comes in handy. So there are two ditches here. Always at least two ditches, sometimes three. If you can only see one ditch, you're probably sitting in the other ditch. So I would hope that at least Christians would be prudent enough to identify the ditches and avoid them. Well, this is the Generations broadcast today, and we want to talk about the ditches. The police state, police overreach. Could it happen in a city, in a state, in a nation, somewhere near you? Bill Jack is with me on the Generations broadcast. Welcome, Bill. Now, Bill, for the record, I'm against police brutality, and you know what? There's a bit of a bias on my part. Now,
are you assuming I am for police brutality?
Not yet, but I'm going to listen to you in just a moment. But I am a bit biased on this because this would have been in 1989. Okay, I'm stranded on a highway out on the central coast of California. All right.
Let me translate that. You were homeless and you were hitchhiking.
Not quite, but I was stranded and my car broke down. So I had called a tow truck, and these unprincipled police officers, came in effing this, effing that, and threw me in the back of their car and threw me in jail that night. So it was very unprincipled. It was a horrible situation. It was a nightmarish situation. And I was exonerated, by the courts. So no big deal as far as my future is concerned. But it wasn't a pleasant situation. Unprincipled police officers exist. Now, not all of them are unprincipled. I get that. Something like 1,000 police shootings where they shoot somebody in a given year, about 100 of them make it to some sort of a court trial, and only one is convicted for manslaughter or a charge of some sort in any given year.
Now, are these trials before a jury of their peers, or are these court bench?
I don't know.
Bench trials.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But we've seen a couple of public trials.
Very public.
Extremely public. And so consider this as well. Okay. 21 police officers are arrested for unwarranted killings in a given year. 21 on average per year. One convicted. Okay. Now, compare that to 50,000 murders by bad guys and 1.2 million violent criminals arrested in a given year. If you get one conviction out of 1.2 million arrests, that's not a bad ratio.
No.
Because we live in a world in which, people are, there'll be bad apples in the bunch. You're going to get some. You're going to get a few. And so I guess what I'm saying is, one of my big points in my opening comments was, can we think rationally about this? Can we get to some statistics? Here's one more comparison, too. I want to throw this out and want your comment on it. 2 people shot and killed in Minneapolis in the last couple of weeks with this whole ICE thing, okay? 36,000 people killed in Iran. How many investigations will happen in Iran given, all of the killings that happened over the last 2 weeks in Iran versus the United States of America? Compare the countries.
Let me suggest that in Iran it'll be less than 2.
Less than 2, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So there's a difference here.
But here
and we can be thankful for that.
It'll be 100%. Okay.
100%.
Both of those will be investigated thoroughly. Mm-hmm. Because they're high profile in this nation. And why are they high profile in this nation? Because we are a nation that still gives lip service, I believe, at worst, but reveres the rule of law, as opposed to a dictatorial society, as you have in Iran, where the king is law. We have the law is king. Mm-hmm. It is lex rex here. The law is king. And yes, laws can be distorted, laws can be perverted, judges can be corrupt, police officers can commit crimes. Nobody is pure, okay? Because the nature of man. And that's why there is a need for the rule of law. And our nation has historically been a nation that recognizes the rule of law, and as a result, there are prosecutions, not just of people we would call bad guys, but of people who are on the side of law who commit errors and commit crimes.
Now, the left wing uses a few instances of police violence to argue for a change of national policy on immigration. Now, that's a non sequitur. The revolutionaries on the street to try to identify one mistake on the part of the folks that are supposed to be enforcing law, border law, immigration law. Okay, so they're supposed to do that. That's their job, and that's legit. We've done programs on that. That's legit. But now the leftists are there to take advantage of the situation. But before, judge, jury, execution happens by media, by the revolutionaries, those of us who are thinking properly are not assuming immediately the police can do no wrong. So we don't assume that because we live in a country where we put this into a court and we do investigations and there's a prosecutor and there's a defense attorney and we allow for the whole thing to play out and the witnesses to come and to take their oath and et cetera, right? It's a rule of law. And we don't assume immediately that the police can do no wrong. That would be ignorant, right? That'd be an ignorant, irrational way to look at what just happened in Minneapolis. So on the one hand, we're avoiding the ditch of saying the police can do no wrong. On the other hand, we're being very careful not to give way to revolutionary thinking, which is also happening on the streets of Minneapolis. Is that the right way to see this?
Right. Biblically, the individual matters, not the group. Mm-hmm. Okay. In Iraq and Iran, what you have is 36,000 people died. Yeah. Okay.
That's what they're saying anyway.
They're saying. And we look at that, and that's just a group number. But the two people who were killed here, they have names. Mm-hmm. And their names are being used in the media because individuals matter. Mm-hmm. That's why we have the rule of law, because even the lowest among us, even the most criminal among us, still
deserves a fair trial.
Is an image bearer of the Creator and has worth and value and is worthy of being adjudicated properly. Their case is.
And America stands for that.
Yes.
Now, what's wrong with the leftist media, though? What's wrong with them? What are they doing wrong here?
Because they spotlight the exception.
They do.
And then they try to make a general application.
They're also judge, jury, and executioner, right?
You don't make good law to the exception.
Right to the conclusion of the matter before the courts get an opportunity to interview all of the witnesses, not just a few witnesses, but witnesses on both sides. They're already biased, is what you're saying. They're already biased. They're assuming that the police did the wrong thing, and they're using it. Let's face it. What they're doing, they're using it to defend a position, a policy decision relating to immigration.
And the other side does that as well. Both Fox News and CNN take a look at the same issue, and they draw mutually exclusive conclusions. But it's because their worldview is flawed. Both worldviews are flawed. One is the police can do no wrong, ditch number one.
Yeah.
Or number two, the police can do no right.
Oh, yeah. There's that one too. Right, sure. At least for the time being.
Right.
There are leftists who support the police state. They will eventually enforce the police state,
but not,
if the police state is on their side.
Exactly.
If it happens to be defending their position. Well, let me throw this out as well. And I didn't do this in my introductory comments, but I think that's very interesting. It just occurred today. A second protester has been killed. This 37-year-old Alex Pretty was armed at the time of the encounter. Well, an assistant U.S. attorney, Bill Asay, took to X and he commented this way. He said, if you approach the law enforcement with a gun, there's a high likelihood they will be legally justified in shooting you. Okay, so meanwhile, the pro-gun associations, the NRA, you're aware of the NRA, the Gun Owners of America, they weighted in on the same thing, quoting on this particular comment. Responsible public voices should be awaiting a full investigation, not making generalizations and demonizing law-abiding citizens. Gun Owners of America said the Second Amendment protects Americans' right to bear arms while protesting, a right the federal government must not infringe with. And then U.S. Representative Thomas Massie jumped into the fray with this comment, carrying a firearm is not a death sentence. It's a constitutionally protected, God-given right. And if you don't understand this, you have no business in law enforcement or government. Okay, so this is really interesting. And by the way, no comment from the liberal media on Mr. Pretty's choice to carry a gun to the protest. Okay, so they're big on the protesting. They're big on that. And I guess at this point, they're making an exception because he showed up at the right protest. Okay. If this guy had shown up at an abortion clinic, you bet they would have thrown the book at him, right? The liberal media would have said, yeah, shoot the guy. He's got a gun.
He's got a gun.
But they're not going to say it as, when we're dealing with the immigration and naturalization service
Now, the question is, was he not just carrying the weapon, was he brandishing?
Well,
there's a difference.
That's the big question.
There's a big difference.
That's the big question. And I saw him reach for his pocket at one point, but it appeared that the official pulled it out of his waistband on the back side. So really hard to tell, super hard to tell. And I tried, Bill, to be the judge, jury, and executioner. But as I was viewing the videos, they were pretty blurred. It was pretty hard for me to tell. And so I'm probably going to have to just leave this up to a proper trial. Right. So is that appropriate? Is that the best way to put it?
Yes.
I think we're all trying to make a call on this. Why? Why are we trying to make a call on this? Because we want to know who's right.
Because we want to be right.
I want to be right on my position.
Yes, on my position.
Say as a pro-police position versus a pro-immigration position.
And again, it's taking a look at the exception and trying to extract from the exception a general rule. You don't start with the particular. You start with a universal truth, right, and then you examine the particular incidents. We in this nation have forgotten that's how a good worldview works. That's how God's law works. You start with the general rule, and then you examine the particulars. We tend to examine the particulars and try to extract a general rule. Yeah. That's the problem here.
Mm-hmm. But we have to apply God's law to the particular rightness or wrongness of an action that was taken. Now, let's get back to the face law.
Yes,
I started with that. So I want you to give just a little bit more background on the face law that was voted on, I think, in 1992. 94, excuse me. And 16 Republicans went for it.
Yes.
Including the guy from Kentucky, the senator from Kentucky.
Rand Paul.
No. The guy who...
McConnell?
McConnell voted yes on the face law. And a number of other squishy Republicans went for it in 1994.
The Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, FACE, Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. The FACE Act, or the Access Act, was passed in 1994. It was signed by Bill Clinton, and it prohibits the following three things. Number one, the use of physical force, threat of physical force, or physical obstruction to intentionally injure, intimidate, or interfere with, or attempt to injure, intimidate, or interfere with a person who is obtaining an abortion. Number two, the use of physical force, threat of physical force, physical obstruction to intentionally injure, intimidate, interfere with, etc. Any person who is exercising or trying to exercise their First Amendment right of religious freedom at a place of worship. And number three, the intentional damage or destruction of a reproductive health care facility, abortion clinic, or place of worship. Now, it was cleverly worded to include churches, places of worship, and so what happened is they roped Christians in on signing off on this.
Which would have been Mitch McConnell's reason, perhaps. For signing off on it.
So you couldn't protest outside of an abortion clinic with the intention of blocking entrance to. Okay, you couldn't threaten. You couldn't physically accost somebody. And then to make this palatable, they threw in places of worship. Now, that is what's being used in this instance.
It's obstruction and interference.
Yes.
It's obstruction and interference.
It's that.
And some violent stuff. Or some violent stuff. It could be obstruction, interference, and or some kind of violent threats used in language. Now,
there are already laws in the books.
There are laws in the books on this.
We did not need the FACE Act.
Granted, it's not just trespassing laws. There's more to it. But at the end of the day, it's eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. I mean, we don't put a guy in prison for 9 years to interfere with a worship service. Okay, there's interference. There's an request to leave the premises. At this point, the police need to be called, and the police need to arrest the people so that we can get on with what we're doing this morning in the worship service.
And if there is damage to the property,
then they got to pay for it.
There are laws that cover that.
Sure. There's all of that.
You don't need the FACE Act.
No.
It was intentionally written to prevent protests at abortion mills. But they cleverly included places of worship to make it so you could swallow it. It's that spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down.
There's an irony here, too. The abortion clinics are a place of worship.
Exactly. They worship death.
For the wrong religion.
Yes.
It's the other religion.
Yeah.
But either way, the federal government has no business in that area. State and local governments do very well, thank you very much, in enforcing private property protection, et cetera.
Right.
And we need to leave it to them. And you don't throw a guy in prison for 8 years for this. Now, if he damages property, he should pay for it. Mm-hmm. And that's where I stand on victims' rights. That's where the biblical law says, hey, we need to reimburse. So when somebody does $30,000, $40,000 in damage to your church building, then they need to pay off.
Or they bomb an abortion mill.
Well, sure. They need to pay off all that.
They pay off.
Yeah.
Because
and if they kill somebody,
yes,
they're going to have to face capital punishment. Yeah. And that's what, state and local law needs to take care of. Federal government, why are they involved with this?
I'll tell you why.
Why are they involved with this?
1964 Civil Rights Act.
What in the world does abortion have to do with civil rights?
Okay.
What's the connection here?
Because here, I'll give you the principle, and then we can extract how we've gotten to this point. In 1964, the problem was blacks couldn't travel. They couldn't, in the South particularly. They couldn't get lodging. They couldn't get restaurants. They couldn't get necessities to travel. So there was a problem for them. Okay. Now, what happened was the local and state governments did not solve this problem. They did not ensure freedom of travel. They didn't ensure freedom of speech, of press. They didn't ensure equal protection under the law for blacks. The federal government said, this is wrong. They stepped in, passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act. This is a matter of where jurisdiction matters, okay? Who should have solved that problem in the South to protect blacks and to ensure that they were equal?
Should have been state and local governments.
It should have been the church.
Well, the church could have stood up and
should have stood up and said, Mr. Businessman, what you're doing is wrong. It is unbiblical. You need to correct it. Mm-hmm. Because the church didn't proclaim the gospel, okay?
Yeah,
then what happened is
private businesses.
Yes,
they needed to
private
say, hey,
businesses. The government has no business in private businesses.
Right.
If you don't want to serve me because of the color of my shirt, that's your business. Okay.
Right.
But
all these guys were attending local churches.
They were attending
Southern
local
Baptist churches, Presbyterian churches.
The church failed in its jurisdiction, and so nature abhors a vacuum. So does jurisdiction. If one jurisdiction doesn't care for its area of authority, another jurisdiction will step in. And so what happened is the federal government came in, right solution, wrong jurisdiction. So that's the problem with the FACE Act.
It's interesting that they went right to abortion and homosexuality and said those who want to commit abortions and those who want to engage in sexual perversion will gain the same quote-unquote rights that other ethnic groups are receiving in this country, which has nothing to do with ethnic rights. It has everything to do with political and moral decisions made by certain individuals.
So it was a right solution, wrong jurisdiction.
Right.
And when the jurisdiction exceeded its authority, then you get these corollaries that we're seeing now, as you just pointed out.
Even more immoral.
Yes.
And even more illegitimate to
unintended consequences.
To the state and certainly to the federal government.
Yeah, unintended consequences always follow when jurisdictions exceed their authority.
Good application. All right. Well, friends, that clears up hopefully something for all of us as we consider what has happened in this country since 1964.
Yeah.
It's interesting how ideas have consequences. Initial actions will eventually snowball into other actions.
Yeah.
And that's what we've seen in the history of this country. As the church has backed away, as Christians have completely abandoned God's law as the standard and do not teach God's law or equip God's people to every good work in every aspect, whether it be business establishments or in the realm of the political sphere.
It's the Great Commission, teaching them to observe all that He commanded.
And as much as Christian churches have refused to do that over the last century or so, we're certainly going to see society degrade into what we've seen recently. Well, friends, I encourage you in my book, The Story of Freedom, available at generations.org. It gives you the biblical principles of liberty based in God's law. So the story of freedom also gives you the battle for freedom that really waged largely through Christian influence over the last 800 years since the Magna Carta, and of course the U.S. Constitution and our Bill of Rights. So the story of freedom, great assessment or great vision to communicate to your children and grandchildren. If we're going to somehow salvage freedom and prevent our children from being turned over to gulags and prison camps, we're going to have to give our children a rooting and grounding in the principles of God's Word. That's why the curriculum we present at generations.org. That's why the story of freedom. Available at generations.org. This is Kevin Swanson and Bill Jack inviting you back again next time as we continue to lay down a vision for the next generation. This has been a production of the Generations Media Network. For more information, go to generations.org/media.